really appreciate the Thank you. So Louise, I really appreciate the invitation to be here to talk with everyone today. And I'm particularly excited to be able to, that the topic is really women leaders in energy and nuclear fuels. Really appreciate hearing that, because when I was head of the chemistry division, I was invited to the Department of Energy, and I used to work for DOE. I used to work at Pacific Northwest National Lab quite a number of years ago. And I've been on advisory boards there. But I really had to chuckle because I ended up being a few minutes late, had to drop off my kids on the way to school. And I walk into this huge room of the Department of Energy, there was the Big Energy, Big Ideas Summit. And I was impressed because it was a huge hotel, huge conference room at a hotel. There must have been 300 men. It was a sea of navy blue suits, and I could hardly see any women in the whole audience. And I thought, wow. And so I'm really excited that there's a lot of women that are going to be talking today that are leaders in energy and fuels. So very great to see that. So I'm just going to talk very briefly, and in terms of strategies for success, in terms of women leaders, and I think it really can apply to all of us. And my advice is to do what counts. And it has to do with confidence, others, understanding, know, trajectories, and superhero. And I'll talk about this very briefly. Now, first of all, there's been a lot of studies that have talked about women in confidence. And one of the greatest books that I've read on this topic is called The Confidence Code. And it's really interesting. And one of the pieces from this says that women typically need to be 90% confident to speak up about a topic, whereas men need to be 60% confident. On the bottom right, I mentioned a study done ages ago by Hewlett Packard, but they were having, it was a study of promotions. And so what they found was that women only applied when they believed they met 100% of the qualifications, and men applied when they believed they met 60% of the qualifications. And this is nothing negative about men or women. We're just wired differently. And of course, there's always exceptions. But in regards to confidence, one of the challenges is that women have more of a tendency to question their knowledge, their abilities, and decisions, and spend an enormous amount of time in preparation for a meeting, discussion, or other activities. And success really does begin with mindset. And so this is something that we all need to learn to conquer. The Confidence Code book is particularly interesting because they interviewed some of the world's top leaders who also had challenges in regards to confidence. And in many ways, I think it's very kind of inspiring to hear their stories as well, to know that you are not alone if you are ever feeling questioning what you've done, before or after a meeting or whatever the case might be. Others is also very important. Take time to invest in others, support others, and recognize others. Nominate them, celebrate the successes. Find time to be a good colleague. And often as women, we're multitaskers trying to do things, the career-life balance. And sometimes what goes to the wayside is really taking the time to be a good colleague, walking down the hall, checking to see how someone is doing. These things are really very important. And we need to make sure, regardless of where we are in our career paths, that we continue to do this. And find mentors and be a mentor. It is important, no matter what stage of life we're at or what stage of career, to always have a mentor. And of course, mentor on the right here is defined in many different ways. If you don't like the term mentor, you feel you're too senior to have a mentor, there's a lot of other sage, role model, whatever, guide, whatever you want to call it. Understanding is also very important. And it's very interesting because it can happen in many different ways, in terms of we really need to understand some of the challenges. And one of them is, women have less of a tendency to negotiate. And if you look at the picture on the right here, the perception of negotiation, I kind of chuckled when I saw this. Men often, not always, view negotiation as like trying to compete, winning a ball game, whereas women envision it more like going to the dentist. That's not always the case. There's always exceptions, but there's a lot of, negative manifestations if we don't understand the importance of negotiation and really kind of dig in and do that when we need to. The importance of the word no, and I love to call this kind of the strategic no. So often, if we are in, if we are in a group where we're not the majority, and this often happens to women, but I've also seen it happen in departments that are all women, not chemistry, all women and only a few men. This happens to them as well, where you're getting asked to be on all these different committees. You're a wonderful multitasker, and so you keep getting more and more and more on your plate. And often we don't like to, we're asked for volunteers in a room and we look around and we don't see anyone else raising their hands. It's really important sometimes to sit on our hands. We don't always have to be the one who raises our hand out of guilt saying, oh yeah, I'll do it. You need to protect your time. That is so incredibly important. And, so we're not saturated with service. Identify what's going to benefit you, benefit your department, your university, your organization, whatever the case might be. But there is a way, especially earlier in your careers, it's hard to say no sometimes. And so what you can do is do a strategic no. And this is what I often did earlier in my career. Will you be on the parking committee? Okay, somebody's got to do it. And thankfully there's souls who like to do that. But the answer to that was no. However, if a position opens up on the research committee, I'd be happy to do that. And then 2 years later, one comes up. And so there are ways to do it in a very effective manner without, feeling like you're making this earth-shattering decision. I think it's also really important to know that each one of us has a very unique trajectory. Doesn't matter which direction we go, and we can change directions throughout our career. And it's really up to us to create our own ideal careers. And I think the picture on the left is really important. If opportunity doesn't knock, build a door. And I really love that saying. There's so many different possible career pathways. There is no right or wrong answer. And, we really need to be open to considering them and pursuing them. And finally, my last point is in terms of superheroes. We have a tendency to be multitaskers. We have a tendency to get the Wonder Woman or Superman mentality in terms of work-life balance. But, there's a point as you advance in your career, you need to think about where are you most needed? Are you making good investments of your time? And help is a really good word to know. We often don't like to use it, but it is a good word to know and even a better word to use. And indeed, help, things like services, housekeeping, tutor services for your kids if you need that. Is there somebody at work who can help you, your research group, colleagues, somebody who can help to lessen the load, particularly as you advance towards leadership? And this is really important. It's also very important to thank them along the way and support them too. And finally, I want to thank you. I'm really excited about the program tonight. And I really believe the strategy to be a good leader is really to do what counts. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to the talks tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angela, for your wonderful opening remarks. Are we ready, Lisa? Lisa?
Yes, ma'am.
Take it over.
We'll see if we can make this work. So do we have all 5 of our outstanding professionals?
I believe so, yes.
All right, very good. So are you okay for me to start?
Yes, please, Lisa, take it over.
All right, thank you so much. And Angela, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I took some notes for myself. I've gotten into a couple of these situations recently. So let's start tonight with the first question. And Umit, I'm going to start with you. I don't have the benefit of Louise's spreadsheet, so I'm going to do the best I can. So I'm going to ask the same question to all of the ladies, but I'll start with Umit. So how have chemistry and chemical engineering enabled changes and improvements versus the sustainable development goals in energy and fuels?
Thank you, Lisa. When we look back, we see many, many examples of how chemistry and chemical engineering have made a difference in improving our environment, our energy policies, our lives in general. And I think it's really important to talk about them, especially to talk about them to the younger generations. I'll just give a few examples. One is the ethylene oxide production. Ethylene oxide is a very important intermediate, I should say, for production of many, many chemicals. And the older process for this is the chlorohydrin process. And it really involves using chlorine gas for ethylene oxide production. This produces, or it used to produce, chlorine gas. And then there is waste calcium chloride. For every kilogram of ethylene oxide produced, there is 3.5 kilogram of calcium chloride that's produced. So that's a direct waste. So what have we replaced it with? The catalytic process for ethylene oxide production. And that's a much greener alternative. And ethylene or ethane can go to ethylene oxide directly over a silver catalyst. So this is a clear success story, which made a huge impact both on energy requirements and as well as on the impact on environment. Another great example is production of maleic anhydride. Maleic anhydride production, maleic anhydride again is a starting material for many polymeric processes. The raw material used to be benzene. Benzene is a carcinogenic material. Now maleic anhydride process has been converted to butane, a more benign starting material. It is also more atom efficient because you're not really wasting 2 carbon atoms for each maleic anhydride that's produced. So another great success story. Another example is the 3-way catalysis. Maybe we don't think about it, but we all have, if we have a car, we all have a catalytic reactor in our cars. And that is taking 3 pollutants that come out of the car exhaust. That is NOx, unburned hydrocarbons, and carbon monoxide, and converting them into 9 products, water, CO2, and nitrogen. Before catalytic converters came about, smog used to be a much bigger problem. If you look at the photographs of Los Angeles coming from 1970s, you can see the smog hanging over the city. But now with the 3-way catalysis, and every car that's produced in this country has to have a catalytic converter, we don't have that pollution. Another example is selective catalytic reduction, SCR process. This is for converting NOx, which comes off from especially power plants operating at high temperatures, using an appropriate reducing agent. Usually it's ammonia. It converts it to nitrogen, and the other product is water. Another example is the hydrodesulfurization process, which removes sulfur before it gets a chance to be converted to SO2, which may lead to acid rain. So there are many, many examples of how catalysis and chemical engineering and chemistry have made a difference in our lives and in our environment. Energy conversion devices, fuel cells, for example, is another great example. These are much more efficient energy conversion devices compared to combustion or internal combustion engine. And every day we are making progress in developing better electrocatalysts that can convert fuel to electricity or to energy. So there are so many examples, and we have so much to be proud of. But the road ahead really requires a lot more work. I'm looking at Luz and seeing if she's waving her hands, because I haven't been keeping track of how much time I used up. But we have a lot to offer as a profession, as chemists, chemical engineers who are working in energy and fuels area. I think this is extremely important that we carry this message to anybody who listens, to voters, to policymakers, to politicians. We have a lot to offer, but at the same time, science and research needs to be supported by federal funds, by state funds, because the science of chemistry has much to offer to solve today's problems and tomorrow's problems.
Thank you, Umit. Very good. And Louise, if I understand our format, all of our panelists are going to answer the same question. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, Lisa.
All right, very good. So let's move to Alyssa. Alyssa, same question. How have chemistry and chemical engineering enabled changes and improvements for sustainable development in energy and fuels?
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be with fellow panelists as well as all the colleagues in energy and fuels. I think this question is really close to my research because I've been working on climate change mitigation, developing engineering solutions to it by doing carbon capture and conversion and storage. I think that chemistry is critical in terms of how we harvest energy resources and materials and use them for the future. And I think in order to create a whole new carbon economy for the next 100 years, now questions are very different. Until now, we were enjoying the fact that fossil resources had so much of the energy and carbon and hydrogen in one package. And we were able to create this modern society with all these technologies. Now for the next 100 years, perhaps we need to really think about having similar commodity chemicals or even new commodity chemicals. At the same time, they should be based on non-fossil carbon per se, or including the renewable energy integrated into it. I think a lot of our research in ACS Energy and Fuels really moving towards that direction, and understanding chemical transformation of these different molecules and elements throughout our both engineered systems and natural systems has been tremendous. And I think last few years in Energy and Fuels Division and all our researchers are looking into this chemical transformation has been very transformative. And I think the way we are looking at how reactions to be carried out, and in multiple dimensions, looking at the materials development, all these things are now coming together. So hopefully in next decade or so, we can definitely make better solutions for climate change. At the same time, we can give a better lives for all the human beings.
Thank you, Alyssa. All right, Michelle, you're up next. I'm not going to ask the question again. I think you know.
Okay.
So go for it.
Sounds good. Great. Thank you for having me today. And I was, Uma and Alyssa just gave two really good spiels on what chemistry has done to enable our improvements and improve and sustainable development goals. But I'm going to kind of add to that in the sense of not just what we need as humans to continue to survive on this planet as we live longer, and that is that chemistry enables development materials. We have to understand, chemistry allows us to understand mechanisms by which things interact at surfaces so that we can then further develop and optimize materials and energy, decrease our energy resources, use catalysts like Uma had mentioned. Our catalyst development, we're starting to look at materials that don't need precious metals. And so cutting back on our critical materials that we dig out of the ground. But we think of chemistry as solving problems, and then everything is chemistry in our life. We can't deny that. And so in my research, I'm mostly interested not only in mitigating climate change through carbon capture and carbon conversion, but also with water and water purification. Water is our sustainability to life too, is that we're going to need. So we've really mucked up our water sources. And so we're in that age of what are we going to do with cleaning up our water, and that in chemistry is going to help us develop membranes to separate and purify water. It also helps in separation and purification of air, for that matter, like Alyssa said, for carbon capture. But in essence, chemistry, what we've learned over the years in chemistry, if you think back, World War II, when things, we were using a lot of radionuclear materials, and they were being spread in our waterways and in our air. we're more conscious about how we utilize those resources, and how that impacts our health. We're more conscious of developing materials that have longer lifespans, are more recyclable, and of course require less energy to develop, to make what we want to make. And of course, we're all thinking about getting away from fossils. So those pathways are going to require chemistry to build more sustainable fronts. So in the end, chemists think of things probably as a more holistic way now. We're not on just a one siloed path. We try to integrate science that can benefit everybody on all different kinds of fronts. So, chemistry is evolving, and we're learning more through the tools that we develop for this, and essentially we're doing better despite some of the negative impacts that we see. We're doing better at creating better pathways going forward for sustainable goals.
Thank you, Michelle. Elise, are you ready to answer
I'm
that
ready.
question?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. I think there were some really great points that have already been mentioned. One thing that I wanted to bring up is our role of chemists, particularly in this field of energy and fuels, it has transformed. Even over the past decade, we've been seeing so much change in the emphasis of what we're doing in the laboratory and outside of the laboratory, and how US policy interacts with what we do in energy and fuels. I think that one thing that's been critically important is the integration of life cycle analysis into what we're doing. So instead of just looking at a single step in the process, we're starting to train more chemists to look at the entire approach from cradle to grave. What it takes to produce things, how they're actually used, how long they're used, what happens to them afterwards. And I think it's only going to become more and more important to increasing the sustainability of the work that we do. We all know that there is a transition away from using fossil fuels as our major components, but moving towards things like battery storage and fuel cells, that comes with alternative challenges. Critical materials, which Michelle answered, they're going to be a real kicker for us. Right? And using things like precious metals, we have to recycle these things. So right now, I'm in Maui for this month, and it's really interesting. They've changed their recycling figure from reduce, reuse, recycle to refuse, reuse, recycle. So not just starting to think about how we can reduce the amount of materials that we use, including things like water, which we didn't really have to worry about in the past, or well, maybe we did, but we just weren't. Now we're talking about actually refusing to use certain materials, certain reagents, things that have a strong environmental impact. And I think this is going to be really important moving forward as well. So one thing I think we also need to get back in the laboratory and teaching students that it's more beyond this one reaction. It's more than creating new catalysts in the laboratory. It's how are they going to be used in terms of petroleum products, right? What are some of the unanticipated issues that we've caused? We've known that there's been a lot, in particularly dealing with climate change. Can we get in front of these things now? And I think it's going to be really important moving forward. So.
Thank you, Elise. All right, Grishma.
Hi,
You're
everyone.
on.
So this is a challenge that's really, front and center. And this is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because these are opposing societal goals in a sense, right? There's need for economic growth. There's need to pull millions of people out of poverty. And there is need for less expensive energy resources to do that. But at the same time, we need to meet our climate goals. And really, I think chemical engineers have a really crucial role to play in this, because we operate at that intersection of serving people on a day-to-day basis through the work that we do. It may not be apparent, but we are everywhere. We are in the cars that we drive, to the food that we make, to the clothes that we wear, and to the mattresses that we sleep on, right? Everything has a carbon footprint, everything has a water footprint, and all of these are impacting our climate. So when we look to the future, and when we think about the role of the energy and fuels community, it's not a role. I think it's a very, very multifaceted role, right? And this multifaceted role comes from the fact that our energy resources, the ones that we can harness, are also undergoing a mix of their own, right? So when we look at the world around us, the cost of wind and solar resources have dropped quite a bit over the course of the last decade. Nuclear reactors are getting smaller, hopefully cheaper. Harnessing geothermal energy is now a reality. And what does this mean for our energy conversions? And as Elise said, what does this mean for our life cycle assessments? What does this mean for our carbon footprint? What does this mean for our water footprint? These are all crucial questions. So this intersection of energy and fuels and sustainability, it's not a question of versus, it's really a question, I think, of integration. And as we look to the future, there are a lot of crucial questions that we want to address, right? So if we have abundant renewable energy, can we now use that to drive the next generation of energy conversion and chemical conversion processes? If we do that, what kind of other resources do we need to pull from Earth? Will we need a lot of catalysts? Will we need a lot of precious metals or rare earth metals? What kind of imbalances might that now create in our environment and in our climate? What does it mean for the mining industry? In the process of solving one problem, are we creating another problem? And even before we create another problem, can we learn from the problems that we have right now to prevent that from even happening? And I think chemical engineers serve as a repository of that information, of that knowledge, and that learning that really can be brought to bear as we look to sustainable chemical pathways of the future. So thanks again for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I hope this topic that I'm really passionate about is something that resonates with your thoughts and your views also.
Thank you, Grishma. All right, so we're going to start with Alyssa this time. And the question is, what are the best practices that we could follow to improve our world as professionals? Do I still have Alyssa?
Yeah, I'm here.
There's
trying to wait until you ask the question. So I think the first question and second question are somewhat.
Did you hear it? Okay.
Yeah, I heard you, so maybe I can answer. So I think first and second questions are somewhat related in my opinion, but as a chemical engineer, when we develop, I guess one of the major goals in our profession is developing new technologies to make people's lives better. And I think in the past, when we developed new technologies, we were really looking at the efficiency, cost, and all that so on. But I think this is the new era, as we all discussed in the question number one, that we still start to care about the environment. In a sense that we are not running out of resources, we are running out of environmental faster, so that the making a decision on that optimization point has been shifted. So in order to really develop a new technology makes the world better place, you need to put the environment and humans within the system boundary. I don't think that's really straightforward or easy to do. And the way we were learning how to develop new technology or process have not been not aligned with these understanding of life cycle analysis, or even doing different learning curves on maybe instead of scale up versus scale out. So I think we should educate students as a faculty member that how to think beyond just the efficiency or conversion in developing technology, and really looking at what is the right system boundary we should draw, and how to analyze them better, so that at the end of the day, we are turning one knob and then changing everything else, so that ultimately it's harming the environment more than improving it. So understanding that global or comprehensive understanding of how technology can be developed, we really requires a lot more multidimensional thinking. Perhaps machine learning can help us in the future, but also cross-disciplinary understanding and sharing knowledge will be very important for the future, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. All right, let's move to Michelle. What are the best practices that we could follow to improve our world as professionals?
So Alyssa touched on a lot of really good points, and part of that is preparing the next generation. As she stated, we need to prepare the next generation to think outside the box a little bit more. And I think actually some of these kids are coming out of high school even doing that. They're more curious. They're not afraid to ask how, why, when, or where. So they're thinking long-term. They're actually thinking more in the realm of sustainability, which is really nice in comparison probably to a generation ago. So I think continuing that effort with our next generation of scientists and impressing upon them, how to think that the impact's not just locally within the little science that they might do in their lab, but it's a global science. We're, as we've been through this pandemic and we've said, we're all in this together. We really are all in this together when it comes to sustainability. It is for the benefit of everybody to have cleaner water resources and better energy and renewable resources. So that's the first part, preparing the next generation. And that leads to teaming better and being more consistent in the science that we're doing. I think that we need to improve upon sharing a little bit more so that, and I think we're doing that. We are more connected through journals that are easier access for us. And so those things are happening, and they're happening rapidly. But also, venues like this, venues like ACS, venues like other conferences help us all get together and think and solve problems. And so I'm not trying to plug that so much, but it is true that networking within your community and even outside of that community, think outside of what the science you're doing and how that needs to grow and scale. Because basic science is wonderful. It tells us understandings of how things work and how the wheels turn, but getting that to grow and bridge to applied science and creating that reality of how would this work in applied science is really important, because we would like to see things come to more fruition and development and at faster pace, because the world moves at a very fast pace right now. And so science has got to move at that fast pace too, especially when we have demands of meeting certain carbon requirements by 2030, 2040, and 2050. And that's a global demand. So, so getting on the same page, and I think we're all doing that, which is it's good. I'd like to see it go a little bit faster. But maybe steady wins the race too. So.
All right, thank you, Michelle. All right, Elise, are you ready to answer the question?
I am. So I think this goes back a little bit to what I talked about earlier. And there's going to be a couple of different parts of this answer, but I do think that we need to get into the mindset of thinking about the entire life cycle analysis of everything that we're doing. And I'm not just talking about the work that we're doing at the bench. I'm talking about things that we do at home as well. And it is a very different mindset than I know I was initially trained in. And it does take very different skills. And I think that transition will really help us moving forward. I personally feel that we're going to have to be a lot more aggressive than we have been. in this. If we're really going to save this planet from catastrophe, we have to be very serious about that. And it really it needs to start now. Actually, it should have started a decade ago, but it really needs to start now. And in terms of general workplace best practices, not specifically talking about the chemistry that we do, you know, we need to realize that everyone has something to offer to the situation, right? There's a great analogy. We're talking about, oh, we're all in the same boat. Well, not really. We're not all in the same boat. We're in the same ocean. We each have a different boat, right? Someone could have a 200-foot yacht that's fully equipped with a captain and crew. Someone else has a hand-carved wooden canoe. You know, we have to take it from a different mindset, that thinking, you know, this person has a different background, so they have something to offer because they are thinking about things in a different way than you are. You know, maybe they grew up in a rural region and you grew up in an urban region, or they grew up in a different country and had a completely different background. I just think we need to realize that everyone has something to offer, and including based on age, right? So if I've been doing the same thing for 30 years, I'm presumed to be an expert, and someone who's just starting out and has only been doing it for one is presumed to not know as much. Sure, they may not know as much, but they do have something to offer. They may think of things in a very different way that you do that can help solve some of these challenges that we have throughout this, not only in energy and fuels, but throughout the chemistry profession. Thank you.
I may suggest, Grishma, are you ready to answer the question? Grishma?
Yes, I am ready to answer the question. I just wanted to add to the fact that as engineers, particularly chemical engineers, we have a certain level of expertise in engaging with industries, in creating enterprise, and in leading innovation, right? But I think to address this challenge of best practices, this has to go beyond just industry engagement and innovation. It has to actually seep down to the community level. It has to seep down to the local level and the individual level. How we actually act in our day-to-day life. How do we actually think? How do we program our minds to the fact that our reality is changing, right? Our climate is changing. Our environment is something, you know, the benefits of having clean air, a healthy soil, and a predictable climate, something that we took granted in the past is not something that might be there for us in the future. So if that's the case, then we really need to think about action at a very individual, local community level. So in this context, I think it's useful to have living laboratory capabilities where you can maybe test out technologies. So if you're living in a close-knit community, or if you have access to, you know, a local biomass conversion plant where you can perhaps test out technologies, where you can evaluate technologies, that might be a great example of leveraging some of those capabilities. Another aspect is in this context, is to think more rigorously about quantification. And I think this goes back to the point of where you draw the system boundary, particularly in the realm of carbon management and water management, and how we can actually harness data at a very individual level and scale up those analytics and scale up those metrics in the context of what it might mean for our consumption patterns and for the way we live and for the way we consume. I think these are all very crucial aspects that we want to address as we move to the future. So in the context of trying to build out a toolkit to help us be more rigorous, I think we need to start not just thinking about what we can do on the technological front and the innovation front. I think we need to start thinking also about, you know, how we can tune behavior and how we can harness some of the local capabilities that we have to build a better future. Starting at a local level.
Yeah, thank you, Grishna. Umit, please. Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of very good ideas have already been presented. So I was going to mention energy conservation, and then I'm in my office right now, and then the lights turned itself off. When you are in the office and there isn't much movement, the lights turn off themselves. So I suppose that's an example of energy conservation. But on a more serious note, I want to go back to educating the next generation idea, but I want to expand it to educating the public. I think if a large percentage of the population in this country still think that the global warming or climate change is a hoax, and if it's still a political debate, that means as scientists, chemists, chemical engineers, academicians, professionals, we are failing. We are failing in taking the message out and convincing people. So we're not doing a good job in educating the public. In a way, educating the next generation by educating our students is relatively easier. We have to work on that, but we also have to work on educating the public, because that public also drives the policies. That's so very important. Why don't we have some television programs, for example, that talk about climate change or global warming or what can be done or sustainability? Why don't we have engineers and scientists as TV characters? Or why don't we have video games for children that talk about global warming or climate change? So there is a lot that we can do as professionals, as universities, as organizations such as ACS. I don't claim to have even one answer or any answer, but I feel that this is something that is very, very urgent, and time is ticking. And if we want to really start finding solutions, we have to start by educating the public so that this is no longer a debating point. This is a reality. We are facing it. We see it every day. Global warming and climate change is real. It is here, and we have to deal with it.
Yeah, thank you, Umit. We are moving to the third question. This is again, Louise. I assume Lisa may have some internet access issue. The third question is, what are the best practices and programs that have worked to drive improvements in the workplace? So I'm going through Michelle. Are you ready, Michelle?
Hi, Elise, or Louise, thanks. So some improvements in best practices in career and life, in balancing that. And that would be focus, know when to say no, always put your list of goals and prioritize, of course. When I look at balancing career, I'll be honest, I had to learn that along the way, and maybe I was just trying to be ambitious. So I will admit to that. I'm probably still in that, because now I'm in a time of doing the science that I've been working on for a long time, and it's come to fruition. So it really excites me, and I've probably dove back into the science more in my career than I care to admit. But balancing that with what you can give back to, what I find for me is finding what I love to do and what I'm passionate about. And sometimes you have to do that, but through trial and error. You know, some of us know our hobbies and take our hobbies from the time when we were a child or whatever, and we take that and we build that into our life or into our career. But in essence, having that career and life balance is not as easy as it seems when you're in any profession. And so what I found that works is that finding something that can take you out of the career sense, find your hobby, find your love and passion that might be something that gives you a refreshing view of what you can go back to on the first day of work on Monday again. So, you know, pulling yourself away from work helps, and actually looking at the world around you helps you really go back to work and in your science and view it differently sometimes. I've found that I'm lucky, to be honest, to have a husband that's an engineer by training. And a lot of what he does as a civil environmental engineer crosses over into a lot of work that I do. But he does it at what I would say at the large scale. And so I learned from him what he's doing to mitigate problems that are environmentally related. And I bring that back to my bench scale. And sometimes it actually crosses over and I think about my problems differently. But it helps me balance how I view things, and it helps me balance what's really going on outside my career, so that I can get a little bit of more value from what some other problems are going on to be added to some of the things that I can use as solutions to my career. So I'm going to be honest, I'm not very good at balancing life and career. Because I do wish that I wasn't so, spent a lot of time in my science so much sometimes, but then I'm so excited and passionate about it, especially with trying to solve some of these problems that are going on today, that it draws me in. But I do try to, going back to Uma, her comment about community, that is really, really important in educating our community. And that's part of what I try to bring from my sense of science. I do go into my community and the high school level, and even at local events when they ask you to speak about your science. And it really opens up people's eyes. And so that's another way I try to balance my life and career, because I can melt the two a little bit sometimes too. When I feel like I see somebody's eyes light up going, oh, I didn't understand that was going on in science. I didn't understand that was a problem, when I'm doing it as my personal time. It's kind of nice to know that you've educated somebody. So that may be not the typical answer you'd hear for balancing life and career, but because I'm kind of bringing my career to my life sometimes, but I find satisfaction in that too. So in the end, it's what satisfies. We all have different things that satisfy us. So make sure you do that for yourself.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. How about you, Krishna?
Hi, everyone. So I spend a lot of time interacting with students, and I also spend a lot of time thinking about, this exchange that happens between me and my student, what I give and what I get. And what I've realized is that in this exchange, there is professional growth and there's also personal growth. So these are two things that are very closely intertwined. And to really be the best versions of ourselves, it's important to invest in people, and it's important to invest in your own creativity, right? And this is not something that really, I think this is something that I've kind of learned over the years, is to invest in the people around you. And when you invest in your creativity, it's useful to everybody. Then that process itself is serving society, right? It's serving your organization. It's serving the people that you work with. It's serving many, many people that you probably are not even aware of, right? So not making oneself the obstacle, but instead making oneself a solution, I think is something that I have found to be useful in helping navigate both work and life. And really, I think taking time to reflect, I think there's lessons to be learned from situations that have gone well, and there are lessons to be learned from situations that have not gone well. that may seem like they have not gone well. So oftentimes what we perceive to be success and failure are very, very closely intertwined. And sometimes giving oneself time to reflect is very crucial, because there is somewhere in that package that you've been handed by nature, there is probably a lesson there. So if you look hard enough, you'll find it, but you won't find it unless you reflect. So really, I think investing in people around you, investing in your creativity, and taking time to reflect, I think, are some of the best practices one can really, practice at an individual level.
Thank you, Grishma. And also, Umed, please, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I have to unmute myself. Hi. In terms of best practices to drive improvements in the workplace, if I look at it from my career and my life, obviously in terms of gender equity, providing more role models has been very important. When I joined Ohio State 36 some years ago, I was the first woman to be hired into chemical engineering department as a faculty member. I was one of 3 or 4 female engineering professors in the College of Engineering. In the entire country, there were maybe 7 or 8 or perhaps 9 chemical engineering faculty female. So obviously things have changed, but providing role models really made a difference. And I think it made a difference for the next generation. Another best practice is really empowering young people. I see it in my own graduate students. If you allow them to grow, sometimes make their own mistakes and learn from their mistakes, but to grow and find their voice rather than just guiding them or looking over their shoulders all the time. If you allow them the space to grow and find their own voice, find their own footing, I think it really helps a lot. And lifelong learning is another best practice. We will never know everything. We are continuously learning, and one of the best way of learning is from my own students. I learn so much from them. And I think being nimble, being nimble in thinking and nimble in doing, and being flexible, I think those are really good practices to follow.
Thank you, Umed. How about Elise? Dr. Fox, Elise Fox?
Yes, thank you. So there are a couple of things I wanted to highlight. And one, I think, is letting ideas and programs flow from the ground up. Personally, some of the most successful projects I've ever seen have been ones that really were kind of like a grassroots campaign to start that people wanted to look at. And I think we can't be afraid of that. And another best practice that I think is we can't be afraid to fail. I think too much we are taught to focus on the successes in research. We emulate and award people who have great successes, but we don't highlight the failures that it took to get to that place. And I think about myself even in the past, growing up, and a lot of things that I didn't try because I was afraid to put myself out there, and I was afraid I was going to fail. We need to work on telling people that failure isn't a bad thing, right? We are learning and we're growing. And I tell my kids this every day. They get really upset and frustrated when they don't understand something that they're learning in school. And I tell them, you're going to learn more from the things that you do wrong than you are from the things that you do right immediately. And I think we just need to reinforce that idea, and it will help strengthen everything within the workplace.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you all. And we're moving on to the 4th question. The number 4 question is, what are your suggestions to enhance collaborations between academia, national labs, industry, and also small businesses and other government entities. So how about we start with Grishma, our youngest professional for today.
Louise, I think this is a very timely question because we don't operate in isolation. I think we operate in the context of the wider universe and in a very immediate professional circle, particularly as engineers. We work, we work very closely with our peers in national labs as well as in industry. So then the question becomes, what are the collaborations that really make one sit back and go, aha, I didn't think of that. So I would say that instead of just pursuing intuitive connections, pursue connections that seem non-intuitive at the face of it, right? Pursue connections that seem challenging. So for example, Michelle raised a point about how her husband is a civil engineer and how she's a chemist and how, they learn from each other. So it's important to be able to acknowledge that people work at different scales. People look at problems with a different lens. People use different kinds of terminology, but instead of just grouping it, I think sometimes it's nice to be able to take that intellectual grouping aside and look to see what might be some of the common themes. And by doing that, we tend to uncover, I think, questions, because I think in the business of academia, you get rewarded for the kind of questions that you ask and the risks that you take, both with your science and the technologies that you want to develop. So it's important to be able to look for connections that seem non-intuitive when you first look at it, but when you actually dig deeper, there's a lot of depth and richness to that connection. So that is something that has been very useful advice for me, and that's something that I continue to practice. Thank you, Louise.
Yes, thank you, Grishma. How about your idea, Umid, about the collaboration? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I think really bringing people together from these different organizations, national labs, universities, governments, small businesses, industry is a very good idea because we have so much to learn. We have relatively different cultures, but there could be really interconnectivity and growth if we bring the ideas together and the cultures together. How can we achieve this? For example, perhaps some of the funding agencies can provide seed funding that will bring national labs, universities, small businesses around a small project. It could be a seed funding, but it could really grow into something much bigger. Providing internships or fellowships for graduate students where they can go and spend some time at a national laboratory, or even a young faculty member can spend a summer at a national lab, or a small business or industry supporting a research program through a fellowship at a university where they really interact closely with the graduate student and the faculty member. I mean, Europe has a lot of examples of that. I spent some sabbatical time in France, and the industry has very close ties with research organizations and universities where they really sponsor graduate students for specific projects, but they're closely involved. It's not just providing the funding and walking away, but being really a mentor for the graduate student. So there is a lot to learn in this space if we can really bring people together, but you have to catalyze the process. It's not going to happen by itself.
Thank you, Umid. How about your idea, Elise?
Interesting. This is interesting because when I worked at the National Lab, it's something that came up all the time. People seem to have this impression or idea that those that work in national labs are flush with funding. And so lots of universities come in looking for people to fund work, but that's not really how it was, at least in the case of the national lab I was at. We had to have specific program pots that we could charge each hour to. Our labor was also quite expensive, and it made it sometimes very difficult for us to collaborate with outside people, in particular because some of the pots of money were automatically cut off from those that work in national labs, right? They were designated only for universities or only for graduate students. And then it put us in a bind where, okay, well, you know, I would love to work with you on this. We have some great ideas, but it ultimately comes down to the way that we are funded to do our work. I think to really solve this problem that certainly didn't change in the 15 years that I was at a national lab, we may need to really fundamentally rethink how we fund research. We may want to do things like look at funding people for long-term instead of funding specific ideas or specific projects. When you give people the room to grow, they grow, you know, but if you're siloed into and you that, oh, wow, unintended consequence of my work, but it's really positive and I would like to follow through with this, you don't have the flexibility to do that. And so, like I said, this is a challenge that's been around for my entire professional career. And I imagine it's been around for as long as everyone on this, this webinar has been working. And so I really think we just have to fundamentally rethink how we fund research in this country. It's not an easy problem. And I'm sorry, I don't have a clear, more straightforward answer for you other than that. But I think it may start with funding people and not specific ideas.
Yes, thank you, Elise, for your unique intuition. Thanks. How about you, Michelle?
Oh, I'm so glad I followed up by Elise. So there's a lot of good things, both good and bad. And I agree with Elise. We don't fund science correctly. We don't fund it long enough. We don't fund it to do the problems, like letting us come to the table with the ideas instead of being directed by funding sources that kind of pigeonhole us to a place where we're told, you know, do this kind of science and we have to follow that. I think it stymies creativity a little bit. However, with that said, I do think there's a way to solve some of those problems. And I think one of the things that is happening is that it is getting better. I see at a DOE National Lab, I've been at the lab for 20 years, and it was just, you do this DOE, you propose to a science source that, and then you wait to see if your idea is selected, and then you move along. There wasn't a lot of encouragement to work with industry. There wasn't a lot of encouragement to work with academics. So the doors were kind of closed. And that wasn't just from my side. I think it was from the other side too. Academics couldn't come in, industry couldn't come in. It was very hard to work with national labs. And that's not just a one-way street, that's both ways, right? And industry has their thing of, they do hold their ideas really closely for good reason. However, I believe there's a couple ways to get around that. One, when you have your networks, you use your networks. I have standing meetings with people in academics and industry and in DOE, and I just on friendly conversations. And these are not just random; they're deliberate meetings to talk openly about, you know, what's your priority in the industry? What's your priority at DOE? What's your priority within academics? What's your priorities? What is the problem that you can't solve? One of the things that at National Labs can do is that we've got the big hammers, right? We've got the big tools. We're good at that. We're good with big computing. We're good with all that good big stuff, something that a lot of academics don't have. What we're limited by a lot of times is hands. We don't have the hands to do all the work that we want to do. So academics tends to have a lot more hands with graduate students and postdocs. And that's one way to interact, but it's also finding the expertise that goes along with that. You know, what can these small businesses, and where's the expertise that it needs to form the right team to solve the problem. And I'll be honest, I've seen a huge change in the last 2 years, and I think it has to do a lot with what's going on globally again with energy in general, mitigating the climate change. We all are in this problem, you know, and I think we're all on the next industrial revolution that we're all stepping into. So new science is kind of being developed. I say new science loosely because science is there. We're just learning what science is. And so there's this new open window or door that we're all going through in energy and all these, you know, water, air, carbon, everything, all those nexuses. And so I think we're in a time of being able to actually work together better, whether that be because we have laptops and social media and easy connection to people. I think that's helping us, you know, kind of accelerate what we do. But I do see it getting better, honestly. I do see that we are doing better. I just think that I go back to Elise, what she does say, I think we do science wrong. I don't think we should be told, go ahead and you're gonna get funded for this one thing and get pigeonholed into something that you have to come up with an idea for. I think we should be really solving and teaming bigger to solve problems the correct way. Industry knows where its challenges are at different scales. Labs can provide, you know, tools to solve some of those challenges. Academics can provide insight how to solve some of those challenges. It's a feedback loop that we all could be sharing. And I think we're getting there. I hope we're getting there. I think we're more open because we're more willing to listen and not shut ourselves off with, you know, the almighty dollar and a lot of this. And so, so I think we're getting better. I hope people can be more forthcoming with sharing ideas. And I think that's where it's gonna help us team up better. And so for me, there's hope. I see it happening. I do see a big change in what's happened over the last 20 years.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you all for your wonderful insights. So we are going to move on to the 5th question. What do you see as the role of professional organizations or institutions in driving change for gender equity? Can we start with our senior professor, Umit?
I will look at it from a different aspect, and maybe others will pick on others. I'm looking at it, how do we increase the percentage of females in sciences and engineering? In engineering, the percentage of females is hovering around 20%. And this has not budged for the last several decades. It has been, you know, 17, 18, 20, but it hasn't really moved. And I'm always wondering why. I think we really need to go to much younger ages to make a difference. Even high school is too late, even middle school is too late. I think we really need to start in elementary education, encouraging girls, getting them interested in math and sciences, because that's 50% of the population. And it is a huge resource. And if we're not utilizing it, then we're not really equipping ourselves to solve the problems that our society is facing. So getting girls interested in math and sciences at a young age, getting them interested, getting them encouraged into it. And again, I don't know how to do that. Maybe providing role models, maybe making science cool, maybe having TV programs that highlight a chemist or a chemical engineer or a scientist that these young girls can look and aspire to. These are things that we really need to focus. So if we're just looking at high school or even middle school, it's way too late.
Yes, thank you, Umid. Can we move on to Elise?
Yes, so I was actually really glad to see that ACS has recently included inclusion in their goals, right? So it doesn't just talk about equity. Equity is one thing, but inclusion is another. And I think ACS including this in their goals is a huge, it's a monumental step forward, and I really applaud it. And I think that professional organizations like ACS are instrumental in getting people to rethink how they think about issues such as equity and inclusion. And and in a male-dominated field, we can be given equity, but being given inclusion is a completely different manner, right? So being included in the discussions and in the idea making is different from having equity with your peers that do that. So I think roles of professional organizations for including these things are vitally important. And I really look forward to seeing what ACS rolls out in terms of giving people, ACS members, the tools that they need to help make sure that they're also focusing on including others in what they do. So yeah, I think it's vitally important. And I think in some ways it starts more with professional organizations than it does particularly with places of employment, because we learn about these things, we learn about these issues, and things that we may have never noticed before suddenly come to light, right? And we can take those tools that we're given and take that back to our workplace. You know, and I think about, you know, over my career, ACS has just been vitally important to me in giving me leadership roles and opportunities that I was not afforded in the workplace. And I am immensely thankful to ACS for that. And I also think that we need to help share that news and help share that with others, particularly those that are coming up the line. You know, my advisor, Chen Chan-Son, who's actually on here, was very instrumental in saying, you need to get involved in ACS. You know, he had his students go to meetings, but that wasn't enough. He actually wanted his students involved. And I think it's really important that we do that for those that are coming up the pipeline.
Thank you, Elise. Can we move to Grishma, the younger professors from institution? Yeah, Grishma.
Louise, I think this is really interesting and topical because, first of all, you know, there are some women in energy and fuels. Clearly, we're part of the panel. But when we look at the wider world, when we look at our representation in industry, and also when we look at our representation in academia, we are not in the majority. And I'll put this in the context of other departments, like, say, environmental chemistry that has a big draw for women. Or, you know, some other aspects of science, for example, biology or even microbiology that is heavily represented by women. But engineering, energy, particularly in the context of science and engineering, energy science and engineering tends to be heavily underrepresented, I think, at all levels, in academia, in industry, in national labs. There aren't enough role models that our children are seeing. There isn't enough diversity. I mean, and there's so much misconception about what it is that we do. Because at the end of the day, anybody who's driven a car, anybody who's, and I feel very passionate about this, anybody who's turned on a light, anybody who's ever had anything to do with trying to better their life, has used energy, continues to do that. Life is not possible without it. So that level of awareness, I think, needs to be brought into, and it has to permeate all life, right? And that's where I think professional societies have a very, very crucial role to play, particularly women. I mean, we make up 50% of the workforce, but we continue to be underrepresented in some of these, at many, many levels. We are underrepresented at a very, very senior leadership. And, and our children who are growing up are not seeing enough role models. So this is a topic that I think requires a multidimensional approach. I think we have to be looking at this problem not just from the view of why don't we have enough women CEOs, or why don't we have enough women college presidents, or why don't we have enough tenured faculty members working on this problem. I think that problem exists, but we should also be looking at the generation that's coming up and try to resolve those issues. And I think professional societies can be at the forefront of that. And, by changing or by encouraging the compositions to change, you're actually sending a positive message to the graduate students who are coming up the pipeline, the postdocs who are coming up the pipeline, that opportunities exist, fairness exists, inclusion exists. And that, there are workplaces that will absorb them and that will give them an opportunity to experience professional and personal growth. So I think this is a multidimensional problem that requires major change from all levels.
Thank you, Grishma. How about you, Michelle?
Hi, Louise. So some of the best practices and programs to drive improvements in the workplace. So back about 15, not quite 15 years ago, I was one of the few females at the laboratory at Oak Ridge, and there's about 4,500 people out there. And they really weren't hiring in my age group, actually. And so one of the things that came up was that women weren't, and I'm not trying to do this as a women platform at this moment, but this was important then, and it still is important. But they needed a program for women to feel included. And so one way to do that is there was a lot of talk of what to do, but there was no action. So the way that I feel that you drive improvement is by action, by doing. You need to do your homework. You need to find out what people feel is what they feel is needed, and that goes for everybody. Because it's for everybody to feel like they're valued at a workplace. And that's probably the most that any workplace could ever offer, is to make their employees feel valued. So what does that mean in your workplace? Every workplace may be different. And so if you're one of those people that like to take leadership roles, I kind of do enjoy taking a leadership role to be able to advocate for people. I enjoy advocating for people. I enjoy clearing a path and helping people so that they don't have things in their way that slow them down. So I think that helps drive improvements when one person can open pathways for many people. And that is getting a seat at the table, being included. And a lot of times in science, I feel like maybe we don't include, we only include the near people to us, the people we know that are our next door neighbors or something. We don't include the right people, somebody that could have a diverse thought, because diversity to me is diversity in the way you think, diversity in the way you do things, diversity in the way you approach a problem. That's where we benefit from everybody. is bringing diversity of minds to the table to solve things. And I think one other thing to do for growth and driving improvements, I feel like we, in science in general, we are very defensive. We're defensive of our own work. We take things a little bit personal. When people make suggestions, we feel like they're defensive, that they're coming off, very aggressive. And, when you review a paper, you may be on the defense all the time. And I think we need to be more on the advocate of, say what's positive. I think we need to be more positive to drive improvements. And then once you improve that positivity, you can actually get more with what they say sugar than you're more with honey than you can with vinegar, right? So I feel like as a scientific community, we always generally are driven to be defensive. And so I believe creating positivity, advocating for your peers, when you see somebody, especially younger people, but for me, it's for anybody, the underdog, advocate for that person, that they might have that one little thing that somebody needs that could really make something grow really fast. And I know for years that I felt like I wasn't given the right opportunities. And I feel like a lot of people don't get given the right opportunities because it's the right time, or they weren't in the right time and right place. There is truth in that, not being in the right time, right place. And there's some really, really, really good, smart minds that get overlooked because they're just kind of moving along under the radar. And so I feel like if you have the choice to be able to sit at the table and take the opportunity and be there to advocate for some of those people, I think you're going to get more out of, more value that can help everybody in general.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you everybody for your wonderful thoughts. So I will ask our audiences, if you have questions, feel free to ask. We gave 3 minutes to ask questions. Yeah, sorry for that. Any questions from our audiences?
Luis, I see in the chat box that there are some questions asked by the audience.
Okay. Yeah, I think I found one, look like give me a feeling like either postdoc or students. The question is, do they recommend doing an internship prior to getting a planning for job in the energy and fuel industry? There are 2 questions. How about our panel answer the first part? The internship prior to the planning for a job. Anybody can start?
I'll start. I'll start with what I thought I was going to do. I thought I was going to do a postdoc and then go into industry. And I felt like I needed more experience out of my graduate school to do something a little bit different and that's what the postdoc was going to give me. And it did. It gave me a different opening, a little bit different additional education on what I had done in graduate school. I think it depends on what you want to do with your life. I think it depends on where you want to be, what level you want to be at. Traditionally, 20 years ago, it was always thought of, and correct me if I'm wrong from my academic colleagues here, that you had to do a postdoc to be able to go off and become a professor. But in industry, it typically was you just went and got a job. And so I think things are changing. I think it's good to have experience and maybe do that internship or postdoc or whatever that is outside of your academics. If you want a different flavor, if you want something different, it depends on what your goals are. But I always tell my kids, keep your eyes open, because you never know what an experience can change your views on. You know, some people go to college thinking, I'm going to study this because I know that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. And then they get there and they go, oh, that wasn't what I thought it was. And so I really do think you should open your eyes, but I also think if you are in an area that you really love and do, maybe you don't need that internship.
Thank you, Michelle. Everybody else?
Yeah, so I will add something. My internship experience wasn't in graduate school, or it wasn't a postdoc, but it was in undergraduate. And it was probably the single most important thing I did to help me figure out what I wanted to do in life. So my goal initially was to be a bench chemist. And I just wanted to get my BS degree and go work in the lab every single day for the rest of my life. So I took a co-op job at an aluminum smelter in quality control. And then I found out that it is exactly not what I want to do at all with my life. And it really led me to realizing that I had to go to graduate school for me to be able to do the type of work that I wanted to do. Graduate school was a necessity for me. So I really think that we also need to consider not just postdocs, but really at undergraduate level and pushing people out the door to try to take advantage of opportunities like co-ops. So.
Thank you, Elise. How about we ask our younger one, Grishma, what's your suggestion?
My suggestion is that there are two ways of approaching this, and one way of approaching this is from the fact that, okay, so if you take your internship, and if you really, really like it, maybe it'll convince you to stay on in this track. And maybe if you take this internship and you invest 3 months of your life, you get paid, and then you realize that maybe this is not what you want to do for the rest of your life, right? Either way, you get paid, and either way, you learn. So it helps in terms of learning, and it helps in terms of keeping you financially afloat, especially if you're an undergraduate student or a graduate student, which was certainly the case for me, because when I was an undergraduate student, I really thought I would go work in biotech. So I interned in Pfizer. It was great. And then a few weeks after I wrapped up my internship and went back to campus, they closed the site where I was working. And it also helped cement the idea that, you know, this was not a sector that I wanted to work in the long run. So, you know, that led to more graduate school, some more graduate school, and here I am. So there are some internships that will, you know, cement your view that that's the industry that you want to be in. So for example, right now I have an undergraduate student. She just wrapped up her internship with BP. She received a job offer. She liked her experience so much that she wants to go back and work for them full time. So it works both ways, right? So it's not just about you learning, it's also about, you know, your industry peers and other folks being able to evaluate talent and helping them figure out who the next leaders are going to be. So in a way, it's like a matchmaking process, right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. You shouldn't take it personally. If it works, it's great. But remember, at the end of the day, it is, you know, a great learning experience, whether you choose to stay in that path in the long run or whether you choose not to. And the way you want to determine if it's the internship experience that you want is to at least make sure that you have a couple of other offers so you can compare and contrast. So you're making sure that you're making the best use of your time, and you're not, and also making sure that you don't have one choice, but you have multiple choices that you can evaluate for yourself. So that would be, you know, my advice.
Thank you. How about our distinguished professor, Umit?
I'm not sure if I have much to add to this. I think a lot of very good ideas have been presented. So no, I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for our panels for your wonderful input. Last but not least, we have our past president, Marinda Wu, who is going to give the concluding remarks. Ellen will introduce Dr. Ellen Chaffee, the division chair, will introduce our speaker, Miranda Wu. Ellen.
Hello, everyone. And I just let me just say thank you to everyone involved in the presentation so far. Lots of ideas and advice that really apply to everyone, wherever you are on the diversity, inclusion list. So it's my opportunity to introduce Miranda Wu, who's an past president of the ACS in 2000. Oh, I had it written down. I've forgotten now. 2013. Okay. I was interested to do a little bit of statistics. Just in the last decade, 2011 to 2020, there's actually been 6 female ACS presidents and 4 male. And anyway, we've got Miranda here to give us some closing remarks. So thank you, Miranda. I know one of the agendas you talk about, and we haven't met, but in some of the things I've read about you, that science is fun. So with that comment, can I turn over to you to make your concluding remarks? Thank you.
In fact, thank you for the introduction, Alan. In fact, we haven't met, but maybe at a future ACS meeting. Though when I was president, I did visit Australia and Monash University. So I didn't get a chance to see you there at that time. But anyway, it's been a wonderful discussion we've had, this panel discussion from women in leadership at the Energy and Fuels Division. In fact, as I reflect on my own career, I am giving a talk at Pacifichem, later this year, but on how women have evolved over the last 50 years. And it's really a wonderful discussion we've had today. I really very much agree and think about what has been said. It's changed a lot. I have been a member of ACS now for 51 years. It's hard to believe. And back in the time when there were not very many women, in fact, in my department, there were only maybe two women in getting their PhDs at the Department of Chemistry. It was a large department, University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And I wanted to work for a professor, a very famous professor, but I didn't know till I got there when there were all these graduate students at the orientation asking, well, who do you think you want to work for? And when I said, Professor Russell Drago, they said, don't you realize he doesn't take women? And I didn't know that. I had already turned down Berkeley and I didn't know that there was this type of thing. And so, but the bottom line is that you have to have confidence and believe in yourself. And I think every woman who spoke today has that. You've all got the passion, the perseverance to do what you want to do. And, you can't let people tell you no. You show them how it can be done. That's happened many, many times. So that didn't, it didn't faze me when every single graduate student I saw said, you can't join his group. And basically, I went to go see him and he said, don't believe everything you've been told. So I ended up being I joined a group of 22 guys and got along well with all of them and ended up, getting my PhD from Professor Drago. So many of you may know the physical methods. He had written many textbooks. And I was fortunate because I did have a departmental fellowship, because I'm guessing that may be why he wanted, me and his group to try a woman, because back in those days, women didn't have a very good, I don't know, he didn't want women, but of course later he did take women. So things, have changed a lot. I have great hopes for my granddaughter, who is just starting school in kindergarten. I really do think women the sky's the limit. and you talk about all the wonderful things in research. It's so exciting. We are the ones who are going to solve the world challenges. And there are two reasons why I decided to run for president, because if I wanted, I really did believe that this is a global chemistry enterprise, and I also wanted to celebrate diversity. So at that time, there weren't that as many women, and now there are more women getting Priestley medals and more women getting the awards they deserve. But I have great hope for the future. The world is evolving, and as the world becomes more multidisciplinary, and if you look at, you know, we got this COVID pandemic right now, but it's the scientists who are solving these challenges. And energy, I mean, I remember actually I was on the council when they were having the debate to combine and make this energy and fuels. It was petroleum. What was the old, some of you may remember, Alan.
Fuel chemistry. Fuel chemistry.
Fuel chemistry and petroleum, something like that too, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, it's a new world and it's wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your experiences and your views. In fact, I was very touched, Umit, when you were saying that you were the first woman hired as an engineer. I believe it. When I went to school, engineering wasn't even one of the options. In fact, I had a colleague, they didn't start hiring women into academia till the 80s, unless there was something more unusual. And I was very happy with the career I had. I went into industry, though I'm the only non-professor in my family because everybody else, did chemistry is a pretty conservative field. When I was a president, I actually, traveled the world and, global leaders, the US is kind of in the middle in terms of how conservative they are with gender equity, but we're learning and we're evolving. So I really didn't prepare any slides at all. I thought Angela's slides were fabulous, but I think if you have confidence and courage and believe in yourself and you have a vision for what you want to accomplish, you can do it. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. It doesn't matter. If you're I've always believed in excellence. So if you are excellent at what you do and you do a great job, you can do it. So with that, I guess those are the few remarks I have.
Thank you so much, Miranda.
Okay.
Any final thoughts from our panelists and also Angela and Miranda? Any final thoughts?
Just believe in yourself. Oh, I have a good thing to think about. I recently had a networking session for the Chinese American Chemical Society. And we had as a guest speaker, Professor Ann Nally, a past president. She was several years ahead of me. Anyway, she has this great motto. She said, become a CFC. And I said, what's a CFC? It's Champions for Change. Step by step. I've seen the changes slowly, very slowly, this diversity and women's equity. It's slowly changing. And I think women, there are enough women now that you can easily elect a president. That's, in fact, some of the men, worry about that. But I don't think of a man or a woman. I think of the person and how excellent is the person who's running for anything. And then the other point that I was going to say that I wanted to, and I know it's getting late, but we can all be champions for change step by step. And I totally agree with what Umit said. It's great importance to educate the public, which is why I believed a long time in things like science cafes, and science is fun for educating the little kids. Once I decided to leave my fabulous career at Dow Chemical, I had a fabulous career from all the time I worked there, but it's a dual career. And we as women, we have husbands who have totally different careers. So I did not move to Midland, Michigan or to Freeport, Texas. when Dow decided to leave, but I had a fabulous time at Dow Chemical my entire time that I worked there. But no, there was a time when women were not accepted. I have a colleague who rose to the top at Dow Chemical as a scientist, but when she came to the US from China, well, not from China, from Taiwan, they didn't allow her to become a chemical engineer and get her PhD in chemical engineering because they thought she was a man, and they made her change to chemistry, so times have changed. Times have changed, and I'm very happy about the future and what is coming for the younger generations.
Yeah, thank you again, Miranda, and thank you, Angela. Thank you for our panel. Let's give everybody a round of applause. Yeah, thanks again. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you for listening. Have a beautiful weekend. Even though I'm going to leave the Zoom virtual platform for another 20 minutes, feel free to social and also feel free to leave. It's totally up to you. Again, thank you all for your input. Thanks, and have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you, Louise, for putting this together. It was fantastic for energy.
Thank you. It has been wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Very nice.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bye, everyone.
Again, it's time for social. Feel free to mingle with each other.
Well, thank you, Louise. That was a wonderful session. Thank you for all your effort to put together this. Hi, Rip. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Can you remove the sharing of the screen so we can see everybody?
Yes, yes,
Huh?
yes, I stopped sharing. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay.
Kirsan, where are you?
Well, Rip, I'm now sitting in my home in Hong Kong.
Okay. You already
Actually, on my photo, I appear to be sitting next to ocean, but I am sitting next to ocean. My actual apartment is on the hill overlooking the Total Harbor. So it's a bit hot outside in Hong Kong now, but I'm okay.
Good. Good.
It's early morning. Hong Kong is early morning, I think, right?
Yes, it is in the morning. It's exactly 12 hours ahead of US Eastern time.
So, thank you, Liu. Thank you, very good. I mean, thank you for your effort and this sort of invitation.
Pleasure. Glad to know you enjoy.
Yeah, it's
Hello,
very helpful network.
Louise, I want to ask one question.
Yes,
if you know our late member Jane Thomas, she passed away in late July. She was member of Energy and Fuels Division. Were you aware of that?
No, sorry.
Okay. So she was a member of SCHB, counselor from Wyoming section with Jerry Meyer, and also a member of Energy and Fuels Division. We're having a symposium on memory of Jane Thomas in the spring meeting, San Diego. So I'll tell you when we talk tomorrow about the other topics, but we're looking for a speaker from ENFL. Is there anybody in ENFL who is good friends with Jane?
Okay, yeah. I will ask around. Can you let me know the name for sure in case I made a mistake? And I'm very pleased to ask around.
Joe, could you say the name again?
Yeah, the name.
Jane Thomas.
Jane Thomas. Okay.
I think Alison was around at the same time.
Well, the name does not ring bell with me, but Joe, you actually organized the Jerry Meyer Symposium, right?
Jane Thomas.
Right, right. And Jane was one of the speakers from Wyoming.
From that, okay, okay. Well, I was a speaker for your symposium for Jerry Meyer.
Right. Yep. I remember that. Yes. You're talking about coal. So
yeah, yeah.
But Jerry is still with us. He is almost 102 years old now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very nice to see Jerry every time. I've seen him for over 25 years, and he's going strong every time.
Great.
Yeah, we have a special issue with catalysis today to recognize Dr. Meyer's achievement. Yeah, Jerry's achievement.
Yes, I saw that, Louis. Thank you for doing that. And I think Jerry will be very, very happy to see that issue.
Yeah, I think Joe and Bill, they took the lead. Our Joe, Dr. Joe Sebo, and William Carroll.
Yeah, I remember Joe actually chaired the session also.
Yes. Because Ranji is our membership chair. Do you know Jane Thomas, Ranji?
No, Louis, no. The name does not ring a bell.
Okay.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, And also, Joe, just let us know what we can do. How can we contribute from Energy and Fuels?
Hold on, I will put into the chat.
Okay.
But we will talk more tomorrow, but I believe this is, oops.
I think okay. Yeah. So I'm very happy to email to our EC members to see who knows Jane Thomas. Yes.
I have a link for her obituary. I will put this in the chat.
Yeah, Repu, I think you want to say something. Yeah.
No, I'm just going to say bye now. I'm going to leave. Thank you very much. It was wonderful to hear everybody speaking and all that. Very inspiring conversations.
Thank you, Rip. I'll see you in ASH meeting, if not before.
Okay.
Also, Repu, October 25, is that right? October 25, we will have another panel discussion. Trinshan will be the moderator.
Okay.
It's a mandate composed of several gentlemen. So I won't ignore our gentlemen.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. See you then.
Bye. Bye, Ranjit.
Okay, bye. Bye.
Bye.
Also,
everyone.
good to see you, Ranjit.
Oh, good to see you, Dr. Sean. Yeah. It's wonderful. Technology makes us be in touch with one another. And thank you, Louis.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, nice to see everyone. And thanks again, Louis. Thank you, Joe. Okay. Okay, I'm going to leave now. Okay.
Bye.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Yeah, also, yeah, thank you all to stay. And I have another meeting at 8. So I'm going to say goodbye, everybody.
See you, bye.
Yeah, take care and enjoy your weekend. See you tomorrow, Joe.
Yes,
Jingo, I want to ask you one question.
Sure.
Before you leave.
Sure.
Despite of this meeting, it was very helpful. Is it possible to join your department as a scientist fellow or postdoc?
We are very delighted to have you. Actually, for the first year, as long as you are the ACS member, as for the first year, to join the ENFL is complimentary.
I know.
Okay.
I mean, if I want to join you as a postdoc or research fellow, your
Oh,
department.
you mean to our or to US? Oh, that's a
Yeah.
good question.
Yeah,
can you
I'm
email-
living in Malaysia at the moment. I'm living in
Okay.
Malaysia as a research fellow at the moment, and then I want to move over there.
Okay, how about you can email to me? We discuss from the emails. Is that okay?
Exactly.
Is that this
Thank
is
you.
a
Thank you.
little more personal? Okay, I don't want to
Yeah.
discuss in the. Is a Zoom is more public. Yeah, email to
Yeah.
me. We think about something.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you for
Sure.
the invitation.
Sure.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.